I've often wondered what that day was like on the banks of the Galilee. And sure, we know what happened, but what really happened? I want the true Hollywood story version of this text. What really happened on the banks of the Galilee? Because the text we read, it just doesn't make sense, at least not to my sensibilities. It's one of those texts that fills me with so many questions that I don't even know where to start. It's as if Mark left out half the story. And as far as I'm concerned, he left out the good stuff. Because there has to be more drama in this text than we see at first sight. How else would these men have just left everything they had and followed him? Did Jesus walk onto the scene with some neon sign above his head that said, "Salvation, this way"? Did he pass out business cards that said, "The way, the truth, the life"? Did he have sights set on Simon and Andrew, James and John before he even laid eyes on them? Was it a spur-of-the-moment decision? Was it a "I'll know the disciples when I see them" kind of moment? Or how could they have possibly left everything and followed? They must not have had much going for them, right? I mean, who else would have picked up and followed some stranger if they didn't have anything better to do? I'm sure some of them had families or jobs, right? And they just left those too? I desperately want to fill in the gaps of this story. Fill me in on the details, Mark, so I can at least try to understand what happened that day. Or I can at least feel a little better about myself as I read it. Because I'm not sure I could have done what they did. Follow me, and I will make you fish for people. From a spiritual standpoint, my first year in college was an interesting experience. I was at a Christian liberal arts school in West Michigan, a wonderful school. Those of you in the midst of a college search, come talk to me about it sometime. But for the first time in my life, I met young Christians who were passionate about their faith and excited to share it with the world. To be honest, I was a little freaked out at first. After all, having grown up among the frozen chosen, which is to say Presbyterians, faith was not something I spoke very openly about. My faith was there, of course, at least in some seeking form, but I just wasn't particularly inclined to tell you very much about it unless you specifically asked me to do so. And I usually reserved that sharing with a youth pastor or a Sunday school teacher. It was just personal. You might think that growing up in a house full of pastors, my journey of faith was normal dinner conversation, but nothing would have caused me to sprint away from that table faster than an honest conversation about my love for Jesus. But during my first semester in college, I met Brittany. Brittany immediately challenged my idea of what faith could look like. Brittany talked about Jesus more than she talked about anything else. Brittany loved Jesus. There was nothing shameful to her in sharing that good news out loud, and she shared often and with a passion the likes of which I had never seen. You didn't even have to know Brittany that well to know that she loved Jesus. It exuded from her. You knew that she sought to live her life similarly to the way Jesus lived his, and if you ever needed anyone to pray for you, even in the middle of a crowded cafeteria, and perhaps a little bit louder than you were comfortable with, well, Brittany was your girl. She was happy to do it. The more I began to learn about Brittany and her friends in the Bible study she attended, the more excited and confused I became about my own faith. Excited because it was enjoyable to be around someone who spoke so passionately of her faith. She really inspired me. Confusing because I began to hear questions like, when were you saved? Or when did you invite Jesus into your heart? Brittany, along with many of her friends, had powerful, life-changing conversion stories like Paul's on the road to Damascus. And then there was me. The girl who, when asked, when did you invite Jesus into your heart, simply responded, I think he's been there the whole time. I didn't really know he needed inviting And I'm sure there were others like me with similar stories, that didn't include this dramatic conversion event, but we didn't really talk to one another and sort of kept to ourselves. So I became a little insecure about my own story of faith. It wouldn't have gotten good ratings, and maybe I thought Jesus wasn't where I thought he had been all along. After all, I'd never had some significant moment of conversion. So I spent a few evenings trying to invite Jesus into my heart. I prayed, I read my Bible, and the earth did not shake, and there was no booming voice from heaven. Nothing cosmic seemed to transpire. I didn't really feel that different, so I assumed I must have been doing it wrong. I became jealous of those like Brittany with powerful, earth-shattering conversions. You know the one, so-and-so was rescued from the depths of her drug addiction and after a wild night awoke to find Jesus, who called her to follow him into the sunset forever. It seemed that these individual conversions were almost cosmic, changing the whole world, or at least changing their world. And here I was living in the same world I had for the previous 18 Presbyterian years. Follow me, and I will make you fish for people. A number of years ago, I had the privilege of leading a youth mission trip to Memphis, Tennessee, much like our summer youth and mission trips here at MPC. In some respects, it was a wonderful week, and in other respects, it was unbelievably exhausting and challenging, and frankly, pretty terrible. You see, our group of 50 from New Jersey was a collection of students and adults at all different points in their journey of faith. Some carried with them a faith that could move mountains. Others were going through the motions their families had expected over the years and searching to make sense of this life of faith, searching to make it their own. And still others were just beginning to learn about this man named Jesus. He was pretty foreign to them. They had a lot of questions and didn't really have many answers. And the unfortunate reality is that our hosts for the week did not have room in their faith for questions. They didn't have room in their religion for any doubt or any wonderings. And so much of my week turned into some form of spiritual damage control. As I held in my arms students who were weeping because they'd been told their deceased relatives were in hell. I sat with students who were suddenly terrified that they didn't have all the answers, or that whatever questions they still had, those somehow invalidated the small amount of faith that they were desperately trying to cling to. To say I was angry and frustrated and deeply hurt on behalf of my students would have been the understatement of the year. I was livid. I was livid that this is what our mission trip had turned into. I still am livid that at least one student we took on that trip looks back on that week as the time when she realized she didn't want anything to do with Christianity if it could possibly look the way it did there. And I was livid that the God I knew and loved was not the God that my students were learning about that week. So many of my students had jumped into this journey with both feet, uncertain where the journey would take them, some filled with more questions than answers, but nonetheless, they were trusting that they just might find God along the way, if only they had the courage to follow. Follow me, and I will make you fish for people. It might be easy for us to look at the banks of the Galilee that day and the fishermen who put down their nets and feel inadequate. Feel as if we don't have the faith to do the same. Feel as if our story of faith doesn't quite measure up. or feel as if our lives are so full of questions and doubts that Jesus wouldn't have taken a second look at us. But the beautiful gift that we are given on the banks of the Galilee is the gift that comes straight from the voice of Jesus. Jesus, whose only command was follow. It wasn't follow me, but only if you have all the answers. It wasn't follow me, but only if you've had some major conversion event. It wasn't follow me, but only if you're 100% sure about all this. It wasn't follow me, but only if you can do so without ever having an ounce of doubt. It was simply follow me. Follow me. Follow me, Sandy. Follow me, Lauren. Follow me, Steve. Follow me, Rachel. Follow me, Gail. Follow me, Bill. Follow me, but not because of the spiritual resume that you bring with you. Follow me not because you are the most qualified or because you are the one free of questions or doubts. Follow me because you are my beloved and I want you to know the depths of my love for you. Follow me. Shannon Kirshner proclaims, here is the truth. Every single day, Jesus calls us to put down our nets for that day and follow. Every single day, Jesus comes to us in one way or another in order to disrupt our lives, to disturb the way things have always been, who we have always been. And he does it not to destroy, but to renew. Not to harm, but to heal. He disrupts us, disturbs us, calls us so that our imaginations will be set free about who we can be in God's reign. Jesus is constantly on the shore of our lives, calling our names. This is the truth. And we don't want to miss him when he comes calling. I imagine whether you realize it or not, Jesus has beckoned you to follow in the past few days and weeks. Maybe you followed that call, maybe you haven't. Perhaps it was that coworker who showed up every morning last week with tear stains in her makeup. Perhaps it was the quiet moment in the carpool when your daughter's friend expressed that she wished she was pretty like all the other girls. Perhaps it was out walking your dog or on your way to work and you encountered someone in need of a meal or directions or someone simply in need of a moment of your kindness. Perhaps it was the stranger quietly weeping in the cereal aisle, or the friend that you thought about several times but never made the time to call. Perhaps it was the opportunity you had to sit by or speak to someone new, but instead you chose those old familiar patterns. We might miss him, folks. In fact, I think we're at a very high risk of missing him when he calls because we're oh so stuck in our schedules and routines and far more concerned with picking apart the details of this call rather than allowing our hearts to simply be open to it. I think we're also at risk of missing him because we're afraid we might be changed in knowing him or knowing the people that he loved so dearly. Follow me, and I will make you fish for people. His invitation is just that. It is an invitation, but it is also a proclamation. A proclamation that I will not leave you as I have found you. In knowing me and following me, your heart will be transformed. Your priorities will be transformed. The entirety of your life will be transformed, and in me you will come to know that the reign of God is near. Jesus does not ask them to add one more thing to their to-do list. Jesus calls them into a new way of being. Jesus is in the business of fishing, friends. He caught us long ago before we could ever respond with love for him, but the choice is ours whether we choose to follow. The choice is ours whether we let our own insecurity or anxiety or fear or selfishness get in the way of that. Follow me, and I will make you fish for people. We can hypothesize all day about what was going on in the minds of the disciples, or what it was about Jesus that caused them to follow, or who they left behind, or who might have tried to convince them to stay. But my hunch is the reason that part is left out of the story is because we're not supposed to get stuck there. In our weekly Wednesday Brown Bag Bible study, we've been reading a commentary by Matthew Skinner alongside our study of the book of Acts. And consistently throughout Acts, there are tiny little details or out-of-the-blue characters or cosmic events that we find ourselves getting stuck on or asking all kinds of questions about, wanting to understand fully before we move on. But Matthew Skinner reminds us again and again that if you get stuck in the weeds of this story, you're missing the point. Because this story isn't about any one of those disciples any more than it is about any one of us. This story is always and only ever about God. We're not supposed to get stuck in the details that aren't even there. Instead, we're supposed to focus on the one who is speaking, the one who is calling, the one who calls us each and every day to follow. Follow me, and I will make you fish for people. My friends, every single day, Jesus is calling you to drop your nets or your plans or your schedule or your worldly priorities and follow, to enter into relationship with him, to enter into relationship with those around you, to remind others that they are not alone and that they are loved. And you're called to follow this call without any guarantee, without the assurance that it will be worth your while, without the assurance that you will ever know how that story ends or ever learn all the details in between. But because the love of God is all the detail we need. So when did you invite Jesus into your heart? Well, I tried to do it yesterday. I've got my ears and eyes open to try and do it today. And I pray that God will give me the strength to do it again tomorrow. Follow me. Follow me. And I will make you fish for people. Amen.